So a while ago, I actually did a video on abortions, and I thought this would be a very good follow-up video to do because I asked you guys if I should review the laws of abortion in Zambia, and one of you actually commented on that video that I should actually do a video on the review of the abortion laws in Zambia. So lo and behold, here's the video. Grab a piece of paper and let's go. Hello and welcome to MK's Medical Review Series. My name is Dr. Moses Kazevu. This is a series on my YouTube channel where we look at medical topics in depth. Today we're going to be looking about abortion laws in Zambia. If you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button, hit the bell notification icon to be receiving notifications of such amazing content every time I post. Grab a piece of paper and your pen and let's go. I always like to tell my students this on the wards and wherever I meet them. My people will perish because of lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I also reject you as my priests. Because you have ignored the law of your God, I also will ignore your children, which is coming from the Bible, Hosni 4 verse 6. Just keep this in mind every time you tell yourself that you do not want to study. So here's a big disclaimer before actually going to the lecture. Remember that this is only intended for learning purposes. It's not a duplication of anything, and all the information is copyrighted to the Ministry of Legal Affairs, the government of the Republic of Zambia. So let me just kindly remind you what we learned from our previous video. If you didn't watch that video, I'll leave a card just right here and also tagged at the end of the video. You can actually go over there and actually watch the video on abortions. Remember that this is going to be defined as a loss of a pregnancy before the age of viability, which according to our UTH obstetrics protocol, this is before 24 weeks of gestation. Or if someone loses a pregnancy that is weighing less than 500 grams, then we refer to that as a spontaneous abortion. Remember that most of these are going to be accounting for the common causes of early pregnancy losses, and this is going to be in fetal origin. Now, when we use the term abortion, actually most people in layman's terms think someone has actually gone out to do something illegal. No, when we're talking about abortion in medical terms, this is just simply going to be a loss of this pregnancy before the age of viability, and most of them are going to be happening spontaneously. Some of them can actually be induced, which we refer to as medical termination of pregnancy, and remember that the expelled embryo or fetus is what we refer to as an abortus. So before we actually go into the law, I just want you to actually have a summary. So remember that abortion technically is legal in Zambia. Technically, because there are certain circumstances where abortion is actually permitted. There are certain circumstances where abortion isn't permitted. So remember that the Zambian Termination of Pregnancy Act permits abortion on socioeconomic grounds, but there is a problem with access to safe abortion services, and this constitutes a considerable problem for the rights to sexual and reproductive health. These are the authors of these words. You can actually look it up, Google it up, and actually read through that article. It's actually very, very interesting. So when we talk about the laws of abortion, what we're simply going to be referring to is the Termination of Pregnancy Act. So you can find this in chapter 304 of the laws of Zambia. It's in section 151, section 152, and section 153 of the Penal Code. And this is pretty much the law relating to abortion. So the act was actually established in 1972. This was Act number 26, and then it was amended in 1994. This was Act number 13. So remember that an act to amend and clarify the law relating to termination of pregnancy by registered medical practitioners and to provide matters incidental thereto and connected therein. So this was established on October 13th, 1972. So there are certain requirements of abortion by law, and these things must, take note, I'm saying must be fulfilled. There are only certain circumstances where you can actually only have one person being present, but the first and foremost things is you must have 3 registered medical practitioners that should be present, and none of these must take part of take part in the termination of the pregnancy. That's the one requirement. And then the other requirement is that one of them must be specialized in the branch of medicine in which this patient is going to be examined to come to the conclusion that an abortion is needed. So meaning one of them must be a specialist in obstetrics and gynecology. The other two may just be doctors in other fields of medicine, but one of them must be a specialist in obstetrics and gynecology. That's the first requirement. You need 3 medical practitioners, and these medical practitioners must be registered with good standing, and they must have valid practicing licenses. The second thing is that this must be carried out in a hospital. So if this is carried out at home, this is carried out outside the confines of the hospital, it's going to be termed illegal. So if 3 registered medical practitioners are not really registered to the Health Professions Council of Zambia, or their practicing licenses are not valid, that abortion becomes illegal. If it's not carried out in the confines of the hospital, the abortion becomes illegal. And none of the practitioners that are signing off for the abortion must take part in the termination of the pregnancy. That's the other thing that you must take note. This is only exempted in certain scenarios, and I think I'll talk about the scenarios in the next page. Remember that for this abortion to be carried out, it must be carried out in good faith, such that if this person continues this pregnancy, it can either cause risk to the life of the pregnant woman, that's the first thing, or it can cause risk of injury to the physical or mental health of the pregnant woman, that's the second thing, or it can cause risk or injury, the risk of injury to the physical or mental health of the existing children that are already there of that pregnant woman. So if this woman fits any one of these criterias, then if it's in good faith to carry out this termination of pregnancy, you have 3 registered medical practitioners, you're carrying it out in the hospital, and none of those that are signing off for the procedure, then you can go ahead and actually carry out the abortion. And remember that if this abortion actually has substantial risk that if the child is born, the child is going to suffer from significant physical and mental abnormalities that can leave this child handicapped, that's another thing that is a reason why an abortion can actually be permitted according to the laws of Zambia. And remember that the above criteria, where you are looking at the risk of the life of the pregnant woman, the physical and mental health of the pregnant woman, and even of the other children that are existing, even of the fetus, we must take into account the pregnant woman's actual or reasonable foreseeable environment, where they're staying at home, their socioeconomic status, in short, and we must also take into account her age. So there are certain circumstances where the opinion of the other 2 registered medical practitioners on the termination of pregnancy, or the 3 registered practitioners, is not needed, where you just need 1 person. In this scenario, it's only when it is immediately necessary to save this patient's life. You know that if you don't carry that out right now, you can't get the signatures of 3 other medical practitioners in essence, and you actually need to save this person's life, or you want to prevent permanent injury or to the physical or mental health of the pregnant woman, then you can actually be that individual who signs off for this abortion, and this can actually be carried out. And under these same circumstances, the person that actually makes this decision can actually even take part, because this is necessary to save this patient's life or to prevent any injury to the physical or mental health of the pregnant women. Even those other people, if you have 3 of those other people that are signing off for the abortion, and in a scenario whereby only one of them can carry out the procedure, then they are at liberty, according to the law, to take part within the procedure of the abortion. And remember that once you have any of these 2 scenarios, or you're falling under any of these 2 scenarios, and if there is need be that you may be going to court, then you can actually have a statement on oath that can be made before the proceedings of court, and actually this can be enough to actually discharge you from the burden of proof that's going to be imposed by our subsection 1. And our subsection 1 are those things that I told you in the very previous slide about the 3 medical practitioners signing on this procedure and signing on the abortion, and all those valid reasons. So if you actually find yourself in such an emergency setup, you're actually permitted by law to actually carry this out. Then remember that the minister can actually make regulations to the act and certain requirements of the act, so keep that in mind. And any person who actually is willingly going to be contravening or even failing to comply to those requirements that I just mentioned, by regulation under the subsection 1, you shall be found guilty of an offense, and you can actually be convicted, and this is actually liable to a fine that's not exceeding about 2,000 penalty units. Actually, I was actually checking this up about the penalty units, and I think one unit costs about 100 and should be 180 kwacha. I think you can actually check that up and actually confirm. And then, of course, this was amended by the Act number 13 of 1994. Then, for the purpose of the law relating to abortion, anything done with intent to procure a miscarriage from a woman is going to be considered as illegal or unlawful, unless if it's done according to the provisions of the law. So if you want to coerce someone to get an abortion, if you are even maybe a boyfriend or a husband and you want to coerce someone to get an abortion, know that you are breaking the law. Then we'll move on now to the second part, which is the termination of pregnancy regulations, what you must actually do when you decide to before you decide to carry out this abortion. So if this woman actually fits the requirements of the abortion, you have to fill in certain paperwork. Is what they refer to as the first schedule, which is going to be certificate A. So this must actually be filled in before you actually start the termination of pregnancy. And if it's not reasonable for you to actually hand it in before you start the termination of pregnancy, it must not be more than 24 hours after the termination of pregnancy. The second thing is that you may fill is what we call a certificate of an opinion, which is similar to it's actually the first schedule, and this should be actually kept, and it should be kept safe. You can actually make copies of it and certify them. Then this should actually be kept until 3 years after this procedure was carried out. You have to keep it for a maximum period of 3 years. Then after 3 years, you can actually destroy it or you can discard it. Then any registered medical practitioner who is going to be taking part in terminating of the pregnancy anywhere in Zambia within 7 days, you must actually give notice to the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Health, and you must actually send this information and all the necessary documentation. There's a second schedule that you fill out. I'll show you the schedules and how you fill them out. There are two schedules, Certificate A and Certificate B, which you actually fill out and actually should send to the Permanent Secretary. And of course, this should be in a closed envelope, which is sealed and must be marked confidential. And it must be addressed to the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Health, PO Box 30205 in Lusaka. So remember that this information that you're given to the Permanent Secretary of Health should not be disclosed to anyone, and can only be disclosed under certain circumstances, and these are the circumstances which this can be disclosed. For example, for the purposes of carrying out the duties of the Permanent Secretary to an office of the Ministry of Health, or that are authorized by the Permanent Secretary, the Ministry of Health, or for the purposes of carrying out his duties in relation to offenses against the act of the law. If they deem that, for example, you had broken the law in some way, then this information can be disclosed to the Director of Public Prosecutions or a member of his staff authorized by him. Then, of course, it can also be for the purposes of investigating whether an offense has been committed against the act or the law relating to abortion to a police officer not below the rank of an assistant superintendent. So anyone below assistant superintendent is not supposed to get this information, or a person authorized by the assistant superintendent. Then, of course, it can be for the purposes of criminal proceedings which have begun. It can be for the purposes of bona fide scientific research. It can be to a registered medical practitioner who terminated the pregnancy. It can be to a registered medical practitioner with the consent in writing of the woman whose pregnancy was terminated. Or this information can be given under only these circumstances by law. So here are the schedules and the certificates that you actually fill in. So this is the first certificate. I'll zoom into it. So as you can see, this is from the laws of Zambia. This is the first schedule, Certificate A. So this is Regulation 2. So this should not be destroyed within 3 years of the date of the operation. So do not destroy this certificate within 3 years. You can destroy it after 3 years. So the termination of Pregnancy Act. So the certificate to be completed before the termination of pregnancy is performed under Section 3, subsection 1 of the Act. So I, that's your name and your qualification here in block letters of your full address where you stay, and I, meaning the name and the qualification of the practitioner. Remember that there are 3 practitioners that have to fill this in. So the first practitioner, the second practitioner, the address, the third practitioner with their address. So hereby certify we are of opinion formed in good faith that the case of, that's the full name of the pregnant woman in blocks and where she stays. So the first thing here, so usual place of residence of the pregnant woman should be placed in block letters. Write everything in block letters. Then of course the continuous of the pregnancy would involve risk of the life of the pregnant woman greater than if the pregnancy were terminated. You circle whichever one is appropriate here. Then of course the continuous of the pregnancy would involve risk of injury or to the physical or mental health of the pregnant woman greater than if the pregnancy were terminated. You circle that if that is appropriate. The continuous of the pregnancy would involve risk of injury to the physical or mental health of the existing children of the family of the pregnant woman greater than if the pregnancy were terminated. You circle that if that is what you intend to or what you have assessed. Then if there is substantial risk that the child, if born, it would suffer from physical or mental abnormalities such as leaving them seriously handicapped. So you can circle that. So you have to circle that, whichever one is appropriate. Then after you circle the appropriate numbers, then you come here and you sign off. So you sign, you write the date. You sign, you write the date. So remember, 3 medical practitioners must sign this, and they must be duly registered with the health. Sorry about that. They must be duly registered with the Health Professions Council of Zambia. Then there's the second schedule that you fill in, which is certificate B, which is much longer. Remember, this one is the notice that you're sending to the permanent secretary, part of it. Then, so this again should not be destroyed within 3 years. So certificate to be completed in relation to termination of pregnancy in emergency. So this is under emergency. So where one individual signs, okay, one individual, your name, your qualifications over there, your address. Then of course hereby certify that in good faith that this person, the name of the person and the full address of the patient. Then of course you can sign, or you can rather circle the one which is appropriate to save the life of the pregnant woman or to prevent grave injury to the physical and mental health of the pregnant woman. You circle whichever one that is. So this certificate of opinion is given A, before the commencement of the treatment for termination of pregnancy to which it relates, or not later than 24 hours after the termination of pregnancy. So you delete whichever one is not appropriate here. Then you sign and you put your date. This is in a scenario whereby you're the only one and it's an emergency setup. You can't wait for these 3 other people or 2 other people to sign off for this certificate. Then you alone as a registered medical practitioner can sign for that. Then of course, this one here is the notification to the permanent secretary. This is of course regulation 3 as well. Then this is for the Ministry of Health of the termination of pregnancy. Again, your name, your qualifications, your full address. Hereby notify the name of the patient and the address of the patient, and of course the grounds to which the pregnancy were certified as. So you circle whichever one is appropriate. I'll actually leave a link as a pinned comment to where you can actually look at these abortion laws and actually have a look at this documentation. So this is just to give you an idea. Then of course you fill in the rest of that, and this is only for official use only. So for all non-emergency cases, so the practitioners who joined in giving the certificate are required for the purposes of section 3 and should be shown below in the appropriate spaces. So you should actually put the name and address, qualification, name, address, qualification, name, address, qualification. Then of course you fill in the details as they are, and once you fill this in, then you put it in a sealed envelope. You address it as confidential to the permanent secretary. Of course the filling in of this is actually quite self-explanatory. I really hope you enjoyed this video on the abortion laws in Zambia. If you did, consider subscribing to the channel, hit the bell notification icon to receive notification of such amazing content every time I post. To Zambia and beyond, my name is Dr. Moses Kazevu. Until next time, bye-bye.